Mark Ellison hadn't planned on adopting a dog. He hadn't planned on doing much of anything after retirement, to be honest. His small house on the edge of Hawthorne County was meant to be his last stop. A quiet place, free from the ghosts of his past. 3 decades on the force had left him tired, both in his bones and in the places he didn't speak about. But something about that shelter visit was different. Maybe it was the weather, the way the clouds hung low like an old weight, or maybe it was the dog himself. German Shepherd, 7 or 8 years old, no chip, no history. Just a scar along the right hind leg and a distant, steady look in his amber eyes. He doesn't answer to any name, the shelter tech had said. Came in quiet, stayed that way. Mark knelt down, met those eyes, and something passed between them. Not recognition, not exactly, but memory, like they were staring at each other through a cracked mirror. "Rex," Mark said, just to say something. The dog blinked, didn't move. Mark didn't hesitate. He signed the papers. The ride home was silent. Rex didn't pant, didn't fidget, just watched, like he'd already memorized the road. At home, he didn't explore. He walked through each room once, then settled by the sliding door as if waiting for someone who never showed up. Mark left a bowl of water. Rex didn't touch it until after dark. For 3 days, they barely interacted. Mark wasn't a talker, and Rex wasn't a beggar. But something built between them, a rhythm, a shared understanding. It wasn't until the 4th night that the first piece of the past came back. Mark was going through old boxes in the garage, looking for a replacement bulb, when he found the folder. The file he hadn't opened in 10 years. A cold case. A boy named Ethan Grady. Vanished walking home from school. No suspects, no body, just a trail that ended near an abandoned train yard. Mark had kept the file out of guilt. He'd promised the boy's mother he wouldn't stop looking. But time passed. The case faded. Until now, because when Mark dropped the folder, Rex stood, walked over, sat directly in front of it, and stared, not at Mark, at the file, as if he knew, as if he remembered. Mark picked it up slowly. "You recognize this?" he asked, mostly to himself. Rex didn't move, just kept staring. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He laid the folder on the table, spreading out the photos, the maps, the scribbled notes from a younger, more hopeful version of himself. Rex circled the table once, then stopped by the photo of Ethan's backpack. A blue canvas bag with a soccer patch. He sniffed, then sat. That was the moment Mark knew. This wasn't just coincidence. This dog had seen something, maybe even been part of it. And Mark, for the first time in years, felt his pulse quicken with purpose. Something unfinished had just stepped back into his life. And it had 4 legs and a memory no one expected. Mark didn't sleep at all that night. He kept circling the evidence laid out across the kitchen table, his eyes flicking from photo to report, from map to sketch, while Rex sat silently near the doorway like a sentinel who'd been waiting years to be summoned. The boy's face stared back at him from a weathered missing persons flyer. 12 years old, freckles, crooked front tooth. Last seen in a blue hoodie on Grayson Avenue. Mark had walked that block 100 times back then, talked to every neighbor, scoured the train yard for days. And yet something had always felt wrong, like they were circling a truth just out of reach. Now Rex had dragged it back into the light. The next morning, Mark took the dog and drove back to Grayson Avenue, half out of instinct, half out of disbelief. It hadn't changed much. The same faded houses, the same rusted fences, the same broken sidewalk where Ethan had last been seen. Rex walked beside him without a leash, staying close but alert. When they reached the end of the block, where the alley met the train yard fence, Rex stopped. His ears lifted. He sniffed the air and then pressed his body against the chain link as if trying to get through. Mark stared, heart pounding. That section of the fence had been patched years ago, after the city sealed off the yard for redevelopment. But Rex had found it instantly. Mark pulled out the old map from the case file, unfolded it, and compared it to what he saw. The alley wasn't part of the original search grid. Somehow it had been missed, or ignored. The next day, Mark brought bolt cutters. They slipped through the alley early, Before sunrise, the light still gray and reluctant. Rex led the way, nose to the ground, tail low. They passed the old loading dock, collapsed under its own weight, and into the warehouse shell that used to store freight cars. Inside, Mark saw the dust of a decade untouched. Rusted bolts, shattered glass, broken pallets. But Rex didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose toward the back, where a wall had partially caved, revealing a concrete culvert beneath. Mark crouched beside it. It wasn't on the blueprints. He lowered his flashlight and saw something metallic gleam. A watch, small, caked in grime. Mark's fingers trembled as he picked it up. The strap was broken, the face cracked, but the engraving on the back was still visible. E.g. Ethan Grady. Mark sat back, heart racing. Rex sat beside him, breathing slow and steady. They'd found something no one else had. A clue that had been waiting all these years. Mark bagged the watch and called Julia, his old partner. She was quiet on the other end of the line, then said, "Where'd you find it?" He didn't answer right away. "I think the dog brought me here." There was silence. Then, "I'm coming to you." They met later that afternoon at Mark's house. Julia looked older but still sharp, the same clipped voice and relentless focus. She listened without interrupting as Mark explained the shelter, the folder, the dog's reactions, the warehouse. Then she leaned in. "You think this dog was there?" Mark nodded. "I think he was more than there. I think he saw everything." Julia opened the file. "Let's test that." She laid out the 3 main suspects from the old case. Men who'd been questioned but never charged. She placed their photos on the floor, side by side. Rex watched, sniffed, sat in front of one. Not the one Mark expected. The quiet neighbor who moved away a month after the boy vanished. "You remember him?" Mark asked. Rex blinked, then growled deep and low. Julia leaned forward. "We never searched his garage. We didn't have probable cause," Mark muttered. "We let him go. He's back in town." Mark looked up. "How do you know?" "He applied for a permit last week. Lives out past Ridgeview now. Owns a mechanic shop." Mark stared at Rex. "Let's go for a ride." And this time the dog didn't follow. He led. They arrived at the mechanic shop just before sunset. The sky bruised purple and red behind the low industrial buildings. The place looked clean, newer than Mark remembered, with a fresh coat of paint and no signage besides a peeling "open" in the window. But Rex stiffened the moment they pulled up, his eyes locked on the door like he'd been here before, like something inside still echoed through the walls. Mark cut the engine and waited, watching Rex, who didn't move until the driver's door opened. Then he jumped out, not running, not barking, just moving with absolute purpose across the lot and to the side of the building. Mark followed, Julia 2 steps behind. The side door was chained but loose, and a small window above had been cracked, likely years ago. Rex didn't try to go in. He sat beside the wall and looked back at Mark. Julia stepped forward. "You really think he remembers?" Mark cut her off. He took a breath, then knocked. No answer. Knocked again. A voice from inside. "Closed." "Sheriff's Department," Mark called. Though the badge hadn't been his in 3 years. The door opened slowly. A man stepped out, lean, wiry, face drawn tight and clean-shaven. Mark remembered him instantly. Daryl Keene. No one had proven anything back then, but he'd always seemed wrong. Too quiet, too helpful, too forgettable. Now Keene looked at them and froze when his eyes met Rex. Rex didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stepped forward and stared. Keene shifted. "That your dog?" "He used to be yours," Mark said evenly. "Didn't he?" Keene blinked. "What are you talking about?" "He remembers you." Julia pulled out the photo, the one from the file. "This was taken the week Ethan disappeared." Keene glanced. "So, you were walking a German Shepherd. Lots of people have dogs." Mark stepped forward. "Not ones that turn up 10 years later and lead cops to a body." Keene didn't answer. His eyes darted to the street, to the alley, calculating. Then he said, "You have no proof." "Not yet." Mark looked down at Rex. But I think we're about to get some. That night, they watched the shop. Julia made some calls, pulled up Keen's old records, minor theft, trespassing, all dropped or dismissed. But one thing stood out. A private security contract he'd had for the train yard the same year Ethan vanished. It hadn't been in his official file, but Rex had known. At midnight, the lights inside the shop came on. Keen emerged from the back, carrying a plastic bin. Mark and Julia followed from the car, staying low. He crossed to the dumpster behind the shop, pried off the lid, and dropped the bin inside. Then he lit a match. Before the flame could touch, Rex charged. The growl he let out wasn't animal. It was war. Keen turned just in time to see 90 pounds of fury flying at him. He dropped the match, stumbled backward, and hit the pavement with a crack. Julia ran in, cuffing him before he could stand. Mark pulled the bin from the dumpster. Inside, an old jacket, torn and stained. Blue, with a soccer patch. Ethan's. The proof they needed. Underneath it, a notebook. Pages warped with age, ink faded, but legible. Ethan's handwriting. A story. About hiding.
About a man who lied.
About a dog who tried to help. Mark couldn't breathe. He knelt beside the bin, holding the notebook like scripture. Julia stood over Keen, who had gone pale. "It's over," she said. But Mark knew it wasn't. Not yet. The truth was out. But justice hadn't caught up. Not until the boy was found. And if anyone could finish it, it was the dog who never forgot. They didn't sleep. Not that night, not the next. The discovery of Ethan's jacket and notebook was enough to get Keen arrested. But without a body, there would always be room for doubt, for deals, for silence to creep back in. Mark couldn't let that happen. The boy deserved more. And Rex wasn't finished. He sat by the front door from dusk until dawn, tail curled, head low, eyes locked on something invisible out there in the dark, like he could still hear Ethan's voice, like he was waiting for the boy to come back. But Mark knew better. What Rex was waiting for was the next clue. And on the third day it came. A storm had passed through during the night, knocking down branches and washing away layers of dust and time from the forgotten corners of town. Mark had woken to find Rex pacing, ears twitching, body tense. When he opened the front door, Rex didn't hesitate. He took off, not with panic but with precision, like he finally remembered the last piece. Mark grabbed his keys, called Julia, and followed. Rex led him north, past the train yard, past the creek, into the forest behind what used to be a lumber station, long since abandoned. The path was overgrown, the mud thick, but Rex never slowed. He ducked under fallen limbs, crossed an old hunting trail, and stopped at a ridge above a dry ravine. He sat, looked back, waited. Mark climbed down the ridge, shoes sinking into the moss, and saw it. Patch of disturbed earth. Shallow, recently uncovered by the rain. He dropped to his knees, hands moving before his thoughts caught up. Just a few inches down, he hit plastic, then bone. Julia arrived moments later. The coroner came next. Then the media. They confirmed the remains 2 days later. Ethan Grady. DNA match. Case closed. But the storm had shaken loose more than bones. Inside a small metal box buried next to the body was a tag. A dog tag, military style, bent, scratched. One word visible. Rex. Mark stared at it for hours. How had it gotten there? Had someone buried it? Or had the dog returned again and again, marking the place the only way he could? No one could explain it. No one even tried. Rex never left Mark's side. He didn't bark at the cameras, didn't react to the reporters. He simply watched, like a witness, like a survivor. The trial came quickly. Keen confessed under pressure. The full truth came out in court. How he had tried to grab the boy, how Ethan ran, how the dog attacked him, bit his arm, left a scar. A scar Mark hadn't seen until the day at the mechanic shop, when Keen had rolled up his sleeve. The prosecutors asked for life without parole. The jury agreed. Mark didn't attend the sentencing. He didn't need to. He already had what mattered. He sat on his porch that evening with Rex beside him, the forest humming with summer wind. "You brought him home," he said softly. Rex looked up, then rested his head on Mark's boot. Peace. It had taken 10 years, but they had finally made it. Mark didn't return to the precinct. He didn't need to. The badge he'd worn for 30 years had served its time, and the boy he'd failed to protect was finally at rest. But something in him had shifted, something that didn't let him simply move on. He kept the notebook. Ethan's notebook. Its water-stained pages had become sacred to him, each line like a breadcrumb across time. And in the middle of those words, always, was the same presence. The dog. The dog came back. Ethan had written. He followed me when no one else did. The dog didn't leave. He knew where I was. He tried to dig me out. Those entries didn't make sense, at least not to anyone who read them with logic alone. But Mark understood. Somehow, Rex had been tied to this boy's story from the beginning, and maybe that tie had never broken. For weeks, Rex would rise at night and stand by the back door, not growling, not barking, just watching the trees. Mark would watch him from the kitchen, sipping coffee long gone cold, wondering if maybe Rex wasn't looking at the woods at all, but at the past, at what still lived beneath the skin of this place. And then came the letters. 3 of them, all anonymous, all typewritten. Each one arrived a week apart. Each one said the same thing in different ways. This case should have stayed buried. The boy was an accident. The dog wasn't. If you keep digging, you won't like what you find. Mark didn't tell the press. He told Julia. She brought the envelopes in for fingerprints. None. No DNA. No postage marks. They'd been hand-delivered. And that meant someone had been close, watching. Rex growled the night the third one came. Not at the door. Not at the trees. At the sky. It was a low, eerie sound. One Mark had never heard before. Not fear. Not warning. Something else. Recognition. That same night he dreamed of fire. Not flames, but heat. Rising. Smothering. And through the thick air came a voice. Not a boy's, not his own. Just one word. Remember. He woke before dawn. Rex already sitting by the bed. Staring. Waiting. The next morning, Mark went back to the train yard one last time. He walked the full perimeter, this time noting what had changed since the case closed. The fences had been rebuilt. The tunnels filled with concrete. The city had paved over its guilt. But one thing remained untouched. The old shack behind the second warehouse. It had been a tool shed once. Never searched. Never mapped. Now it was half collapsed. Door hanging open like a mouth too tired to speak. Rex entered first. Dust kicked up in little swirls. Mark followed with a flashlight. Inside, everything looked abandoned. But in the far corner, beneath a pile of plywood, was a hatch. Small, bolted shut, but not locked. When Mark pulled it open, the smell hit him. Musty, rotten, old paper and older secrets. A single box rested at the bottom. And inside that box, Mark found the missing files from Ethan's case. The original incident reports, the unofficial notes, and a single cassette tape, labeled K9/Grady, redacted. He played it at home using Julia's old recorder. The voice on the tape was familiar. It belonged to the former K9 unit supervisor, now deceased. Dog 47 responded with extreme distress near the tunnel site. Refused to leave. Tried to stay with the boy. Refused to eat for days after. Had to be relocated. Dog was scheduled for euthanasia after behavioral concerns. Mark paused the tape. His throat tightened. They tried to put him down, he whispered. But someone didn't go through with it. Rex sat by the speaker, head low, tail unmoving. Mark pressed play. Instead, Dog was transferred to independent shelter under falsified intake. Name erased. History erased. But Dog refused to connect to new handlers. Escaped twice. Always returned to sight. Then silence. Then a final note. This dog isn't just responding to trauma. He remembers. He knows. The tape clicked off. Mark sat in stunned quiet. They'd known. Someone had known. And they tried to bury it. All of it. But Rex had survived. Not just the fire. Not just the loss. He had survived abandonment, erasure, grief. He had held onto the truth in a way no human ever could. And he had waited, for 10 years, until the right hands opened the right file, and his memory became more than instinct. It became action. Rex had brought Mark here, not by accident, not by chance, but by faith. Faith that someone would listen, that someone would care, that someone would finish what had been broken. And now Mark knew he had, because some justice isn't a trial. Some closure isn't an arrest. Some stories don't end with headlines. They end with a dog, waiting by a grave, breathing in silence, remembering for those who no longer can. The ceremony was quiet. No speeches, no cameras, just a few people standing on a hill overlooking the river, with the wind tugging gently at their coats. Ethan's mother stood beside Mark, holding a single photograph in both hands. The last school picture ever taken of her son, now laminated and worn from years of being folded and unfolded. She hadn't spoken much, only nodded when Mark told her the truth, the full truth, and how it had come from a dog that never gave up. She cried only once when she met Rex. The dog didn't bark or move toward her. He simply sat and lowered his head, and she dropped to her knees beside him and whispered, "You stayed." Mark stood apart, watching the scene unfold like a story he still couldn't believe he'd been part of. The grave marker had been placed days earlier, a simple stone with Ethan's name, his birth and death years, and a single engraving below, "Always remembered." Julia stepped up beside Mark, hands in her pockets. "You did it," she said. "No," Mark replied. He did. Rex was different now, not visibly, but something in his posture had softened, as if the burden he'd carried was finally lifted. He slept longer, ate more. Sometimes he even wagged his tail, a slow, uncertain motion, like he was relearning how. Mark didn't go back to police work. He didn't need to. The past had been accounted for, the story told. But some evenings, when the sun dipped low and the shadows grew long, he'd find Rex on the porch, staring into the woods. Not tense, not waiting, just watching, as if listening for a voice that once called from the dark. And sometimes, Mark would sit beside him, hand resting on the dog's back, both of them quiet in the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting, but from remembering. Weeks passed, then months. One spring morning a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a medal, police issued, engraved on the back, "For loyalty beyond duty, K. 9 Unit 47. And a note, typed, no name, just 5 words. "He earned this, not me." Mark placed the medal on the mantel, hung the tag, Rex's old dog tag, beside it. Then he walked outside, knelt beside his companion, and whispered, "Come on, partner, let's go home." And they did, together, because some cases are never solved by evidence. Some are solved by memory, and some by love that refuses to be forgotten.